Welcome to the Probability Podcast. Discussions on emerging and converging technologies, problems that are being solved, and the probability of positive and negative outcomes that we might expect. Now, please welcome your hosts, Jason, the generator Spracklin, and Patrick, the discriminator Lozon.
Hi everyone. The topic for this week's podcast is personal intelligence. People are increasingly using AI as personal assistants and companions in various ways, reflecting a shift in how technology interacts with human emotions and daily life. So, the questions for discussion today are we using AI in a way that creates leverage, or are we quickly becoming too dependent on these assistants? Also, can AI truly be considered a companion without it first reaching sentience? Or are we only able to offer artificial empathy? And what are the risks associated with intertwining this technology in our everyday life? For example, how will our interaction with the surrounding world evolve as personal AI assistants become more prevalent? And what implications will this have on our social behaviors and connections? Along with, what does the future hold for data privacy in a world where AI assistants have access to our most intimate details? And how will we navigate this balance between personalization and privacy? And finally, in an age where trust in technology is both imperative and increasingly scrutinized, how should we approach building trust with AI assistants that know us better than we know ourselves? So, Mr. Discriminator, what do you think? Are you ready for AI to be your friend?
Will it be my friend? Well, I don't know about that. But I mean, the idea is that they are embedding AI in many different devices out there right now. Your home computer. I mean, we talked about Siri before and that kind of thing. So that's pretty common knowledge today. People understand how those work. But then, with the advent of ChatGPT and all the similar types of tools, Perplexity and Claude, they've introduced this ability for providing assistance from AI, but with a limited, profile information. So they don't. It's not really tailored to you, but it's more of a conversation, right? And from that, you'll get your information, but it's not as like a dynamic model that looks at you and what your, whatever your specific needs and desires are and that kind of thing, right? So I think where it's interesting, right, is with these, we'll call them AI assistants that are really tied in to yourself, right, your information. So, those, I mean, we can consider something like MS Copilot to be kind of a hybrid to that. Not so much, it's more professional, but it can start building a profile on you. But there's a product called Pi out there. There's Replica. There's Candy AI. We start getting into a number of different AI tools out there that are really dedicated to being your friend, right?
Mm-hmm.
And you can take that purpose and do with it what you want. But personal AI assistants, they will. There's a number of different possible, benefits here. They can tap into your information, your personal information, and then they can utilize that information to respond to your needs in a dynamic fashion, right? So there's wearables like Apple Watch and Oura Ring and that kind of thing. I mean, they're always present, right? And they're providing you direct information back. And you throw AI into the mix and they're now interfacing with you, right? Whether it be specific, uh, purpose or more of a general purpose. Either way, they can provide you, advice, reminders, insights, that kind of thing. So personal AI buddies, they can be fun, right? Or they can be quite practical. You can have a my fashion AI advisor, right, that knows all the styles and can critique your outfit, let's say, right?
Or knows your wardrobe, for example. I know
And
my
yeah, yeah,
my wife has this app that she's been using for years. I forget the name of it off the top of my head, but yeah, she's basically cataloged her entire wardrobe, and every time she buys something, she puts it in. It helps her arrange and organize things. But thinking about taking that to the next level, where it can actually suggest those those outfits that she already had. I mean, she would jump at that in a heartbeat, and that's
right,
like you said, that more playful side of things where I mean, other than maybe tying it into advertising and recommending things to buy in the realm of fashion, or understanding what your personal style is, there's not a lot that can be done with that information other than maybe market more things to you, as opposed to other things that know much more, intimate details or financial details or what have you, that they're going to have information that could be sort of dangerous, I suppose, in the wrong hands, which I think we'll get into a little bit later. But yeah.
yeah. But just following along this path of thinking, it could be instructional too, like putting makeup on, things like that, right? Which are
Hmm.
there's many different looks you may want, and you know you can have that visual support and feedback, right? Um, so there's that. There's also, given the fact that we do have some challenges around services and support. Like for instance, with doctors, right? We could have specialized AI assistants that can be very helpful to us, like a personal AI doctor, right? And tied to all your wearables, always getting that information, whether it be a medical device or a commercial device related to your health, and then provide you feedback on um, what to do from a health perspective, um, and advising you. Let's say if you have a specific, um, suffer from a specific malady or something, whether it be low, it could be diabetes or whatever. It can help you advise what you should eat, what you should do. Be that voice in your ear, so to speak, to get you off the couch.
Yeah, or even to
Right?
get out and see a doctor, right? Sometimes
Yeah.
you certainly you don't know what you
Yes.
don't know. So I mean, it can give you a certain amount of advice, but it could also alert you to something where hey, you might want to go see a doctor. I had a situation last year with my own father who was not doing overly well and was very sort of low energy, sleeping a lot, and this and that. And then finally, I discovered he had a blood pressure monitor, and I took his blood pressure, and it was sort of almost dangerously low. And those were we sort of
Yeah.
engaged doctors, and he was actually on low blood pressure medication that he had been on for years and not questioning it, and then reached a point where
Yeah.
he didn't need it anymore and continued to take it. So in other words, if with the advent of wearables and some AI, somebody could be alerted and say, hey, your blood pressure is very low, you should seek medical attention, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Is
And it's
certainly
amazing. It's
useful. Yeah.
amazing. It's amazing what kind of technology is coming out that can actually predict and measure, because it's not always direct observation, right? The idea is some of these devices can infer, your oxygen rate and your
There's a
blood pressure,
culmination of
but
data.
but
It's not
yeah,
one data point. It's looking at things from all points
yeah,
of view. And there's also a big problem with sort of availability of medical care and doctors. And, a lot of people can't even get a family doctor. And not suggesting we're quite at the point where this could replace a family doctor, but it could at least provide some level of monitoring that would, like I said, send you to the hospital if you needed it or that type of thing. So I think it's really an interesting area in terms of assistance,
yeah.
in terms of medical for sure.
Well, you think about general assistance too, right? I mean, it could be
Hmm.
anything. Like you have this entity, AI assistant entity, in your travels, right? Doing whatever you're working on, whatever you're doing, it can provide support and advice. I mean, you think about specific things like you're a finance advisor or something like that, where it could help you make decisions. Now, interestingly, if you lose the money, who is it? You to blame, or is it your assistant? Well, he
Yeah.
took the advice, right? He took the advice.
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's a slippery slope, right?
yeah, yeah. So, I mean, bottom line, it's getting very interesting. Where it's when we start looking at these personal, these personal assistants, where they're there to get involved with you, interface with you, provide you that mental support. That's where it gets to a point where it's okay. Well, who's going to utilize those, right? There's
Mhm.
lots of questions around that, and it's out there now. It's being used widely, right? So we think about um, building up personal avatars and that kind of thing, and you then talk to these entities, right? Um, but how complex do these entities get? Right, is the question, and where's the where's the financial model? How is that being supported as well behind these technologies? Right. Um,
Yeah, and how are people's identities or sort of personality going to be protected? I noticed Meta has sort of decided to integrate, celebrities into their AI, and I guess certain celebrities have signed on so that you can get, car directions from Samuel L. Jackson or what have you, right? That
yeah.
they sort of signed on to that, and whether other way could that be used? And in fact, I noticed I had an email the other day from the platform that we're using for this podcast that has an AI component in which it will actually learn my voice, and then I can type in text. Say if I wanted to read out a sort of an intro, or if I wanted to read an advertisement. We don't have advertisements yet on this podcast, but the idea that it sort of made me take pause for a second and thought, okay, well, they're claiming that this model now can take my voice and my mannerisms, and I can simply just type in what I wanted to say, and it'll give a representation of me, which, just so people are listening, this is actually me talking. This is not the new AI feature on our on our podcast
Are you
platform.
sure?
But yeah, I don't know. Maybe it is.
Yeah.
But that's kind of interesting in that now it's able to mimic things. And of course, this is not what this particular podcast is about, but we've talked about implications in terms of deepfakes and politics and things. But certainly, its ability to mimic is becoming increasingly more real, if you will, right?
Yeah. If you take these AI assistants and then you enable them, right, from a point of view of you have an AI bridge or an AI API that specific services then can use. So, for instance, I want to book a ticket, right? Well, your AI can do it for you, right? And book
Mm-hmm.
that plane or that concert ticket or that that train. And this is where it's getting very interesting from a point of view of enabling the assistant to do things for you. So you can just say, I want to go on a trip, and it'll do it, plan it all out, and arrange it for you. But that takes a huge amount of resources and from other services, right, to tie in to those particular assistants, right? So that there's some definite growth possibilities here if this does take off, because inevitably you're going to have these agents, right, running for you, performing tasks, and all these other services out there that are tied in over the internet, being able to interface with your agent. And is it your agent, right? Is it how is it representing you? What's unique on that connection, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is it actually representing you? Is it somebody else, right?
Well, it needs to know a lot about you as well, right? Is it
Yeah,
and will it make assumptions and fill in gaps? I mean, it needs to know everything from your preferences, your financial situation, or to plan a trip that you can afford. It needs to understand, your a whole lot of things about you that you may or may not want to divulge, but that was sort of one of the questions I asked at the beginning is, what are we willing to give up, or what kind of balance are we going to strike between letting these assistants know everything about us in order to go and do these things for us, or, do we need to, kind of be a bit more cautious around that? But again, we do give up a lot of that, when we're using, say, a travel agent, like a person as well. So I think it's a little bit less about that and a little bit more about, the whole trust factor. And are we, by putting giving up our data and ending up in this personal assistant or model, are we willing to do that? And who's in control of that data? Are
Yeah.
you actually in control of all that data, or is the, company that's created that sort of assistant or software, do they have access? Or, there's that whole idea around privacy, which I'm sure we'll dig into a little bit later today as well.
Yeah, I don't. This keeps going back to that question, right? Whether or not we have sufficient controls in place for these particular, AI assistants, right? And without having that in place, without having some hard standards in place, there's going to be a definite resistance to trust, right? These
Mm-hmm.
companies, right? Now, let's talk about this companionship and emotional support piece. Because to me, this is like, I think you recently watched Her, Jason,
Yeah.
and that was an interesting movie. Um, you
Well,
know,
yeah, Spike Jones was, I mean, movie was made 10 years ago. It was predicting a future in which humans are having emotional relationships with AI entities. And in fact, through some of the research done for this week's podcast, I discovered that that's very much the case, or even
yeah,
has been for the last couple of years. And it's becoming even more so. Interestingly enough, the movie was set in 2025, which is next year, but it also assumes that the AI has some sort of sentience. But what was most interesting to me is that what the premise was basically that the humans in the movie were lonely, that they had just left a relationship, or the main character had just gotten divorced, and that they were using this to sort of fill in some kind of void in their life. For example, even though they knew it was sort of AI, it still somehow was filling part of that void. And I think largely due to the fact that the AI had a personality and some level of sentience, and can have a sort of what resembled a fairly normal human conversation, albeit in the movie it was Scarlett Johansson,
and her
playing the
voice.
the voice, so it was an
Yeah,
actual like human interaction when they were filming. But it seems like we're quickly steamrolling towards that, right? Where these sort of even if we haven't reached that sentience or super intelligent level, we're still giving these platforms, ChatGPT and others, this kind of human voice that sort of acts in kind of a humorous way, or a flirtatious way, or whatever it is. We're really trying to give that personality to AI, which is where I think this idea of companionship and emotional support comes in, right?
I think it's interesting because it's a phone app, right? In this case, it's what can it really do for you, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
basically a communication tool, right? It goes back and forth, holding on these conversations, right? And the value is in these conversations. But when we look at further, expansion in this area, it's going to go back to our previous episode, where we're going to be actually embodying that within a robot, right? And humanoid. So that's a whole new change in what we've seen so far. But what we have so far is very interesting. Basically we have AI companions like Replica and Candy AI, and um, the what are these all about, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
they built these tools. We'll call them AI tools to become friends to people, right? And so, well, what's the level of friendship? Well, if you look at the Candy AI model, it's getting fairly intimate. It's what we call adult level, right?
Uh,
And why would people do that, right? What are they getting out of that, right? I can understand if you look at somebody who is, let's say they're compromised, right? They're ill, and they're very lonely, right? But we're going beyond that. We're not talking about. We're talking about an average person, average healthy person
Hmm.
engaging with these devices, right? For friendship, even though at the top of your head there, oh, it's all fake.
Friendship, or maybe a little bit more, maybe, going verging into the relationship area. In the movie Her, the guy develops a relationship, and he has to explain to people how his quote unquote girlfriend is an AI. Um, but I guess it's at a point in time which people are accepting that. In fact, one of the scenes in the movie, he goes on a double date with his coworker, with the and the coworker has a real girlfriend, and he brings his AI girlfriend on the phone, and they all treat it like it's normal, which actually makes it kind of humorous,
Yeah,
to be
yeah,
honest. But I mean, who knows sort of where we're heading with it? But to play devil's advocate, maybe a little bit, I could see some utility, just in the sense that a lot of people find human relationships, and by that I mean sort of like dating relationships, challenging and potentially messy, and that I could see a scenario whereas if somebody approached it in a bit more of a healthy way, perhaps, that they could use it as a way to get reactions to the way they're thinking, that the way they are talking to a partner, or different scenarios. I could see it almost in a way of training people to be better at relationships, maybe, right? If it was done well enough, that if you were to say something or make a comment that gleaned a negative reaction, and maybe you didn't understand why, then this AI could explain to you why, right? But this idea of wholeheartedly saying, okay, well, now I'm going to be in a relationship with AI, I mean, I think that might very well enter an unhealthy mode, like you said.
what are you getting out of
you
it,
know
right? Yeah,
well, interestingly enough, like the person that built Replica, this platform or product, Replica, built it not initially to be a friend, but built it in a way to memorialize her friend who had died, and that sort of fed in a lot of information and conversations, and had this sort of AI replicate. I guess that's where the whole idea of the name of it, Replica, comes into play. And it was part of the grieving process and dealing with her friend's passing, for example, a way to say goodbye, which, you know, everyone could take that as they will. That while that may work for some, it may not work for others. But I was recently, we've been watching the new version of the Orphan Black show, Echoes, and one of the main characters is involved in sort of growing, bio organs from scratch, and this whole altruistic mission of, we're going to help fix people that need organs. So as opposed to needing donated organs, they could simply grow a liver or a kidney for someone, right? Which is fairly interesting. But then they get the idea, well, we've done all this. Can we grow an actual human? And then what pushes her over the edge? She's initially opposed to it, um, like on moral or ethical grounds. But what pushes her over the edge is that her life partner, um, basically dies, and she wants to bring her back because she can't deal with the grief. And then the idea is that, well, and then the
yeah,
one guy in the movie and the show says, but is that actually her? You're bringing her back based on DNA and everything else. So anyway, that's a whole side thing. But I do think that we're oftentimes motivated in matters of the heart and grief in different ways to do things. So I do think there's an angle here, but I think, like you said, it could be a bit of a slippery slope, perhaps, right?
well, it's funny, you brought up a few examples based on art, right? So it's whether it
Yeah.
be movie making or literature. We've got this where art is intersecting with reality now, right?
Hmm.
Um, the idea that the technology of today is able to be compassionate and empathetic and can respond to you in any particular kind of state and provide you comfort, right? So that's an interesting uh, you know capability if you think about it. Is it really being empathetic? From what? How can it you know uh, align itself and truly understand you, right? Or is it
Hmm.
more? or is it more just programmed response, right? So, you're acting a certain way or you're saying certain things, then it's going to respond to you with a certain algorithm, right? But it's not really understanding you. It's not really aligning. It's what it experiences and in the past that it has, and trying to align that with you and what you're saying, which is what a person would do, right?
Hmm.
It's basically it's a con. It's a smoke screen. It's a trick of the lights. Um, it's
It's like the
basically
Wizard of
reading.
Oz and the little man behind the curtain, right?
So the challenge here is that, okay, we're going to make it seem so genuine, and they've been able to do that, right? They've been able to pull it off, based on the subtle cues and language, for instance.
Yeah, and personality and inflection and
Yeah,
things. In fact, they had the OpenAI, this new version of ChatGPT that does interaction with voice and talks to you and so on. A lot of people commented on, the human qualities and this type of thing. But interestingly enough, going back to the movie Her, um, so Scarlett Johansson was originally approached by OpenAI to be one of the main voices for this new version coming out, and because of course they saw her in the movie and thought, "Oh, this would be great. We'll use her voice." And she turned them down, and they went ahead and did it sort of anyway, or at least they created a voice that was very similar to hers, and then she threatened to sue them, and then they had to go back and change the voice and so on. So it was there's an example of sort of art imitating life and life
yeah,
imitating
yeah,
art type thing, where we see some of these things that were depicted in movies 10 years ago that people thought were probably, oh wow, that's amazing, we won't have that for 50 years, and all of a sudden here we are. But I think I mentioned this either to you personally or in a previous podcast about how it is a little bit of trickery, like you said, that it's making people feel like they're talking to a human when they're not. Now, that could be looked at in a negative sense, but could it also be looked at in a positive sense? And by that I mean, like, I watched a video on this sort of robot they had created for old age homes, and initially I thought, oh wow, here we go, right? Like, that's really what people want in the later stages of their lives, to be, dealing with this robot, this android. But what we saw in this sort of mini documentary I looked at was that people actually did respond to it, and they were interacting with it. And part of my experience has been that there is a lot of sort of loneliness that comes along with old age, and especially when people lose partners and so on. In fact, when we went to, after my father passed away, we went to this old age home where he was, and we were clearing things out, and my wife was waiting in the lobby as me and my brother brought things down, and I came down, and she was talking to this lady, and basically I asked her, Arthur, what were you talking about? And she's like, she just wanted somebody to talk to.
yeah,
And that, and here she was in a home full of people, but yet she really latched on to my wife, and they had a nice conversation, and she mentioned she lost her husband. So I could see, even though it is a bit of smoke and mirrors, for some people who, again, like you said, don't really have that access to social constructs and so on, where maybe it could fill in a bit of a gap. Like, but then again, it's, as you said, it could be a bit of a slippery slope. But I think you have to look at all these things from both angles, where it could be a net positive for somebody, that even if they know it's an AI, maybe it still fulfills some sort of need there, that it gives them someone to sort of talk to and get a response back. And then if it's lifelike enough, like, maybe that's enough for somebody to in terms of their mental health, or what have you, right?
well, we have this original interfaces. The older ones were just text back and forth. They would send you
Mm-hmm.
messages on your phone, whatever, what have you, or on your desktop. And now we've got the next level, which is using voice, right? And some of the tools out there are capable of doing, basically performing uh, some emotional behavior with the voice. So they do tonal changes and that kind of thing. Um,
Mm-hmm.
some other ones aren't quite there yet, but the idea is you can, have you can sound very genuine with your voice, and modify that voice, right, in a way that makes it very personal to the person you're having the conversation with. So that being said, right, then what's the next level, right? Obviously, the next
Mm.
level is going to go into the we'll say the image. So we've got text now. We've got the audio, and now we're going to go to the image, right? And the avatar, the image, is not going to be a cartoon avatar.
Yeah, we're seeing that. I saw something yesterday about they're creating sort of influencers for social media. And I mean, the video was pretty striking. Like, I tell you right now that if I was scrolling through and I didn't see the headline that this is an AI generated person, I would not have been able to tell you the difference. At least not at sort of first glance. Maybe there are small details that eventually will come out. But then again, if you end up on video calls with somebody, sometimes they have a bad connection. The footage is a bit grainy. They're blocking out their background. The things are glitching in and out. I mean, we're already living in this virtual world that we accept some imperfections. But I could also, back to the negative, I could also see it being used to fake people out into giving up their life savings. We see that with real people, right? Where they strike up a so-called romantic relationship with somebody online. They never see this person, in the flesh, but yet they're sending them money. There's all kinds of horror stories you see where people have been, sort of swindled out of their life savings. And I think, and, we touched on that in the previous episode a lot. So, but certainly in the era of deep fakes, if you take that to the next level of real time avatar with voice and interactions and things, I mean, it's, you can let your imagination go wild there, but we're certainly heading into a territory where the, I guess, quote unquote, bad actors are going to have some pretty interesting tools that they're at their disposal now, right? And there's the other side of the double-edged blade, I guess, right?
The idea behind this more intimate connection can get very interesting for your privacy,
Yeah, yeah,
especially when you consider the the industry or that particular companion, and that's a corporation, and that corporation owns the data, right? And that data, from a point of view of what they say they will do to what they actually do, is not in your control,
yeah,
right? Um, they can say whatever on their website, but it matters what they do, right? And it also matters how well they do it. Like, for instance, how well they secure their systems, right?
What happens if it gets hacked and then people get
Yeah.
access to that information? I mean, we think about
What
financial
was that
information,
website?
medical. Um, yeah, I mean, if this type of thing can be used to blackmail people, especially people
Yes.
in positions of power, authority, celebrities, right? You're getting into that area of the intimate part where people are potentially in the moment revealing things about themselves that are, considered private, and then all of a sudden it gets out into the open. We've seen that when, celebrity cell phones have gotten hacked and so on, right? So it's definitely an area people should be a bit cautious about interacting with, for those very reasons, right? I guess, especially if you're someone that, I mean, even if you're not a celebrity or whatever, you could easily be blackmailed by
Yeah.
somebody, right? You've seen those emails, those spam emails about saying, well, we're going to expose your whole internet history to all your friends unless you pay us money and all this kind of stuff, right? That most times that stuff is just bogus. But what if we get to the point where it's not, right? And that's where it's a bit
Yeah.
of a slippery slope, as we keep
Well,
saying.
I think the ways of, to help manage this is to move the privacy control back to the user. So,
Hmm.
the user can then define the encryption keys of all the data, right? So the data is no longer accessible by the corporation. It's encrypted data, your encrypted data. The only person who can access that data is you and your particular key. And if you lose your key, oh well, right? Um, so the intent there then is to control. You have a platform, right? And you have the ability to encrypt, and you leave it up to the user to exercise their privacy controls or not, right? In this case, right now, it's all or not, right? There's a level of trust with the corporation, which I think is, to me anyway, a bit foolish,
Hmm.
because I don't typically trust corporations or their ability to protect themselves 100%, right? That being said, um, if you think about robots, for instance, right, that are in your home as a assistant 24/7, they're basically, there's a lot of questions around privacy there. And is that data
Hmm.
that's being collected, is that being transmitted out? Or is it being encrypted and stored? Um, or is it not being encrypted, right?
Yeah, if you bring that into the realm of the workplace, so we haven't touched too much on this side of things as well. So we touched a lot on the, the personal companionship, friendship, all these types of things. But increasingly, people are using it. Like you said, we have MS Copilot, but now you're seeing these tools being integrated into pretty much any piece of software you're using. Um, for some sort of professional purposes, you're seeing these tools get integrated into there. And I remember at my last company, they were warning, because I guess people just, I mean, this was sort of, I guess, fairly early into ChatGPT becoming sort of more mainstream, I guess, and they were warning people to not use it and start inputting company information to sort of output work, and that you could end up with some private or proprietary information ending up in these models that could be accessed by competitors. And then I guess they had a contract with Microsoft and said you can use Microsoft, chat, Bing Chat, Copilot, because there's some agreement there around the way this data is being used. But I think the genie's kind of already out of the bottle. I think a lot of people are using these models for day-to-day work, and granted, look, I've used them and I think they're great in terms of productivity tools. They can certainly allow you to get things done a lot faster. It can take large amounts of information or documents and summarize them and reformat them. It can give you alternatives to things. It can help you do research. I mean, there's so many things in which there's a positive aspect. But again, back to your comment around privacy and data, then how much are you feeding into these systems is certainly a concern. But also, like, how much dependency are we having now? And are people getting to the point where they're using these and they're just sort of, well, that's my output, right? That's the thing I'm doing for work. And, are people going to know whether it's truthful, whether it's accurate? The more that people start to depend on it or believe that everything that it outputs is accurate and right, the less they're going to put into it themselves, or the less time they're going to spend, fact checking it or what have you. So now you have a situation in which you have an over dependence on it, and I think that's sort of a danger as well. In fact, I just saw an article about how apparently OpenAI has developed a tool that detects AI generated content with a 99 point something percent accuracy, and they're declining to release it right now, which is interesting. And why is that? Well, probably because it has so much use right now that as soon as they release something like that and people realize how much stuff out there is AI generated, it's going to create a problem, within possibly within workplaces, within professional type situations, right? And you have a lot of situations where students are using it to write papers and write exams, and teachers are using it to grade papers, and it's sort of like this idea of like over dependence. I wonder what you think about that, because I think that's the other danger outside of privacy, for example.
Yeah. Okay. So there's a few aspects of this. One you mentioned was blind trust, right? Blind trust.
Hmm.
It's always going to be accurate. It's always going to give the right information, and we know that's not true, right? It does its best. Technology does its best, but sometimes it makes mistakes. And how are you going to trap that one time it didn't, right? So blind trust is about having a general sense of utilizing this technology and then following up with that checking, your own fact checking, right? To ensure that what you have is accurate, right? So that's one side of the coin. When we start thinking about utilizing this technology across the board and depending on it day in, day out, I think that's a reality that's going to happen. people are going to be becoming more and more dependent. I I really worry about our future of moving into mediocrity. you know, well, the average person doesn't really need to know much. It just doesn't need to memorize anything, doesn't need to learn anything. It's just all there, all available. And by the way, it's okay if you don't really pursue any kind of mental research on your own. It's not needed. That's a very dangerous path we follow down to get to that level of dependency.
We've already seen that, right? Where people are, again, this is where we start sounding like the old guys again. But before the days of the Googles, right? You had to know things, and that you
We
had
did.
to retain information, and that you had to, if you didn't know it, you would go out and spend time investigating it, talking to people, reading books, going to the library, whatever it was, right? And
What?
now,
Go to the library?
well, what's a library? Um,
What's a library?
and now you have it where it's always at the tip of your fingers, right? And it
Yeah.
has been for a long time, right? Google's been around for a long time, and again, it's great in some ways, but now it's been even more supercharged, because it used to be that you could go to Google and type something in, it would give you a bunch of results. You'd probably look at those results and go like, okay, is this a good source? Okay, it looks good. Then you go in and read the article. You do some sort of reading and learning. Now you have, which we'll get into in a future episode, the idea of the answer engine, right? So we're going beyond the search engine into the answer engine, where now I just ask it something and it gives me a fully formatted, summarized response. And it's sort of it's a very succinct answer in a way, but it lacks a lot of the wider context. Now, an engine like Perplexity, which I actually like personally, gives you all the links where it got that information, which is helpful. Now, whether you go and look at those or not is up to you. But yeah, I mean, this is where we're venturing into sort of over uncharted territory, as it were, I guess, right?
Yeah. Yeah. I think what's really interesting in that aspect, and this is getting just a little bit past our conversation point, but when you ask Perplexity or GPT or Claude or anything, it's going to provide you the information that's been trained on, or the information that it finds on the web based on high percentages, right? So, um, from a point of view of the, we'll call it the outlier information, it's not going to provide, right? So if you're in need of that information, if you want to understand that information, discover that, and then utilize that to help fill in gaps, um, you're not going to get it. These tools aren't capable of doing that just yet. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so maybe I just spell it out more clearly. Give you a kind of example. But let's say I want to understand all the outlier information around the pyramids, because there's a lot of it, right? Um, if you ask some very direct prompts to your chat GPT or whatever, what have you, you're going to have basically the summation information coming back to you, but you're not going to have this particular outlier information, that these particular facts, and then perhaps some philosophies or ideas around those facts about
Mm-hmm.
what could, if you want to know how old the pyramids are, you're not going to get a comprehensive collection of information back just yet. You're going to get the general information back about what the general thoughts and beliefs are, right? Um, so if you think about it from a point of view that you're trying to expand and learn, as you utilize these tools to expand and learn, you need them to actually delve into these outlier information components as well, and consider that. But that being said, I'm diverging off our thinking.
It was it's still related, right? I
It
talked about
is,
this
yeah,
over dependency on technology or whatnot, but I don't know
yeah,
if you
yeah.
ever seen the movie Idiocracy, but
Oh,
this guy
yeah,
in the army goes into a
idiocracy.
top secret hibernation program, and is forgotten about, and he's left, to awake in a future so incredibly moronic that he's easily the most intelligent person alive. So
Yeah,
that might be you, Patrick. We'll put you in a hibernation program, and
yeah.
and when you wake up in 20 years, you will be the most intelligent person in America. So,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that is a possibility that I would be that, but highly remote.
I, ah,
You
you
know,
never know.
yeah, yeah.
We're
But
already headed down that slippery slope a little bit, but yeah, no, absolutely, it makes a
uh,
lot of sense.
that was a
But
killer
this,
movie.
yeah, no, it was interesting. But again, back to what we were kind of talking about. The sort of topic for today was around personal intelligence. We're touching on a lot of other areas, but I do think that this is sort of a little bit uncharted territory because we've had AI for a while. Now we're reaching this area of using artificial intelligence to engage humans in these dynamic and personal conversations, right?
Yes.
Making it feel like you're chatting with a real friend, and you might be looking for advice or just needing somebody to talk to. And I think that's sort of uncharted territory. And again, where we said there's a lot of challenges there. I was, we were chatting earlier, before we recorded today about this new device called Friend. That's a sort of an amulet you wear around your neck, right? And the trailer really shows this sort of intimate relationship people having with it. Goes everywhere they go and everything else. And I think while that's interesting, I do think that it's like we said, it's somewhat challenging, and that is that really where we want you know society to head? But I do think it's interesting in the sense that there has been some polls come out, and that there's been a massive increase in people feeling lonely and disengaged, especially sort of younger people. Right? You've seen some of these. Uh, Surveys and that comes out of the U.S. that it's almost become a bit of an epidemic, which sort of ended up getting accelerated through the pandemic, for example, right?
Yeah,
And
the pandemic for sure.
I'm not entirely sure where that comes from. Essentially, although I think a bit of that physical isolation has certainly caused it, because they talked about it accelerating, like I said, through the pandemic. So is the answer these sort of amulets or online chats, or I mean, is that really a solution to that problem? It doesn't really feel like it. It may be for some people that have particular challenges, but do you think it's going to and actually help solve that to some extent, or do we think it's actually going to make it worse and further isolate people in terms of people not feeling the need to go out and interact with real humans in real situations? Oh, it's fine, I have my AI friend and it's always there for me and it never argues with me, and it's my friend. Yeah, I think if we look at it, while we did talk about the idea of smoke and mirrors and whatnot earlier, I do think if we reach this higher level of sentience, or general intelligence, I think this is where it'll get even more interesting, right? Like right now, you know, it's sort of mimicking human behavior and human inflections and so on, right? And that is that idea of artificial empathy, right? But if it actually gets to that next level, and we don't quite yet know whether it's possible, but we are heading in that potential direction, then it's a whole different level. So while that right now people understand that that's not the case, and that they can sort of separate themselves, maybe in the future that they can't, um, but I think that it's but we're already using it in different ways that have been very unexpected, right? There's just been this explosion of AI that's infiltrated sort of everywhere, and we're using it to sort of augment the way we communicate in some cases, right? Whether it's professionally or personally. I don't know if you watch South Park, but they had this great episode on what they call deep learning, and that the kids have figured out ChatGPT, and the whole storyline revolves around Stan who's having problems in his relationship with his girlfriend. And he's a typical kid, right? He's not overly emotionally responsive to her and so on. And he's talking to his friend, and he says, I don't know what to do, like it's not going well. And he said, oh, just use ChatGPT. He's like, what do you mean? Well, when she texts you, just take that message, put it in ChatGPT, and ChatGPT will tell you what to say, right? And it's some people think South Park cartoon, but they really make some interesting social commentary. And in this one, he starts sending her back these messages, and when he what he gets back is that, oh, she starts getting very engaged. And, throughout the process, the relationship starts to turn around. And, basically what happens is that, she starts to fall in love with Stan again, but it's not Stan. It's ChatGPT is sending all these messages. So it's this complete misrepresentation of what's going on in their relationship. And it's working great for him. And I think maybe later on she finds out it's not, right? And then that whole episode also touches on, which I mentioned earlier, that they also figure out they can use it to write their tests and exams and papers. And then the teacher figures out they can use it to grade the exams. And then the whole episode, which I highly recommend, it's that you can find it for free online. It just basically shows how, taken to the extreme, how these technologies could completely take over our lives, in which we're not really even having human interactions anymore. We're just having approximations of human interactions and relationships. And I know that sounds maybe a little bit out there, but that's one of the things I like about art and about comedy, right? It can take things to ridiculous extremes and really show you where things could go. And I mean, we're kind of heading in that direction in some cases, right? We've seen some potentially like sort of dangerous things happen as well. There was a case where this guy basically ended up, it was kind of a sad story, but ended up, committing suicide. He was worried about global warming on the planet, and sort of found this, solace in an AI chatbot. And according to his widow, he claimed that this AI loved him more than his family did, and whatnot. So I mean, that's taken to an extreme, but that's obviously somebody that was very vulnerable to begin with. So I think that that's sort of the other side of things, is that someone like yourself might look at it more cynically, and might have a more reasoned response and interaction with it. But on the other side of it, people can get pretty invested in sort of virtual things to the point of sort of not so great outcomes, right?
Yeah, I think that's where the challenge is right now. We're basically these AI components or companions. They're response engines, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not. There's not an overseeing intelligence behind it, right? To so this case we talked about, where you talked about the individual, the person was obviously in a very poor state, and the questions, the comments, the conversation that he was originating was being mirrored back to him, right? In a lot of ways, because it's a response engine, right? Um, Instead of having like this, we'll call it a more intelligent reasoning entity who's observing the situation and recognizing, and then steering the conversation. It's it's completely opposite. It's just I respond based on what you give me, right?
Yeah, I was reading essentially that while we might have some sort of fulfillment from it, that it's sort of, the idea is that it's like eating junk food, right? That if you eat a lot of the junk food that's out there, you feel full, you feel satiated in the moment, but then it's actually not giving you the nourishment that you need, right? And so in the
Okay.
end, are people going to be left lonely afterwards because they realize, well, this is actually not real? They might get that sort of feeling of it being real. And on the flip side, it's, there is something about human relationships and friction and, confrontation even, and things like that, that is really the true dynamic of human relationships. So do you want something that's always in agreement, that's always wanting you to feel better? It's sort of pandering to you in a sense, right? And I think that's the other side of things, is that it's again, back to that idea of smoke and mirrors, right? It could
Yeah.
cause some real problems when, because that's the other side. When you finally reach the point where you feel like you've maybe been duped, then that's a whole other set of feelings that you may have to deal with potentially,
Well,
right?
I enjoy brainstorming with Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini. I enjoy that process.
Mm-hmm.
Like I said, I get a certain amount of value out of that based on the fact that there's this huge amount of data that it has access to that can come back with
Yeah, yeah.
information. But it doesn't have, like I said, it's all the generalized beliefs. It's not the outlier stuff, right? It doesn't have that back end reasoning to connect all the dots, right? It's a response engine. But it really can help you, build out great information, right? And come up with some great novel ideas. However, um, but if we take that and we apply that to the idea of companionship, right? What are you really getting out of that, right? Um, like I said, is it all just smoke and mirrors in the end? Does it really matter? Um, I would say right now it's really being initiated by the user, and it's up to the user to really build out any kind of value at all. But it is a worrisome path to go down to consider that entity anything more than a response engine.
Yeah, well, I think we're seeing the lines being blurred as well, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, this proliferation of these AI assistants and so on, and these technologies being integrated into everything we're using, right? And this inability to tell, you know, truth from fiction and understanding whether something's real or whether a voice is real or being generated, right? We're sort of entering that area of science fiction that we didn't think was ever going to fully come to fruition, but now we're seeing it come to life before our eyes. And I think that's the other challenge is not knowing, when what you're dealing with is AI or is not AI, for example, right? And that you could end up getting fooled by it. Given your best efforts to sort of be on your guard. I mean, like we spend a lot of time looking at these technologies and companies and how things are integrated, and we know what's sort of going on to a certain extent. But even with our limited, let's just say our limited human brains, right? You just said like these assistants have access to all this data. Well, as much as we spend a lot of time ingesting this data, I'm sure there's going to be times that we're still sort of fooled or duped into thinking that something is real when it's not. So I think that's where things start to get really interesting. I mean, we're still in that sort of beginning phases of things, right? When you think about the potential for where things are going, we're still in that sort of infancy phase of AI and all these technologies that are just every week there's something new coming out. I mean, think about where it's going to be, sort of, in 2, 3, 4, 5 years is sort of mind blowing to think about how fast. I mean, even we talked about some things in earlier podcasts that I've been reading lately. Oh, these are actually like real things that we were talking about. Oh, what if we get to this point where we have this type of technology and then all of a sudden there's something in the news that says we have it already, right? And so it's happening at a pretty fast pace. But let's bring it back to some of the original questions and maybe try and wrap things up just a little bit. So, we asked, are we using AI in a way that creates leverage, or are we quickly becoming dependent? I think, and we'll get your quick thoughts on it. It feels like we kind of landed on the point that we are very quickly getting very dependent on it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. There's a lot of interest in utilizing these tools to help improve what we're doing today. So that's the assistance side. And it's actually being promoted, right? Actively promoted. Everybody's expected to utilize these tools, right? And whether or not they want to or not is the interesting case there.
Well, there's a temptation there, right? It's integrated into everything. I see it on LinkedIn. I see it everywhere, right? Where it's just like everywhere, everything I use has this little prompt that says, "Hey, do you want AI to help?" It's almost like Clippy from the old Microsoft Windows 95 is following us everywhere now, right? Where it's
Yeah,
like, "Hey, can I help? Hey, can I help?" It's just everywhere. There's a chat bot, there's a prompt, there's something everywhere now, right?
yeah. So we've got this, we'll call it mass rollout of AI, right? And all these different areas. Now that's one thing, but then we also have this, private industry interest in utilizing that same technology to, I'll say, I'm not sure it's take advantage of people, but to basically provide people needs and or satisfy their needs, and it's not in a wholefully sufficient manner, right? So
Hmm.
I would say to me, I look at these personal, compassionate, minded bots out there, these
The
AIs, and I'd say,
companions, the
well,
friends.
the friends, yeah, I would say, well, not 100%. Sorry, I don't quite believe that. Um, Now, keep in mind that there are, like everything else I've said, was a good thing too. There's good and bad with this technology. We're not going to get away from it, but I think it's very important that our children, right, understand the difference, right? And there's no real conversations around that are occurring yet about the dangers around, we'll call them the fake people, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because bottom line, like I said, when it comes to artificial intelligence, it's eventually going to go to AGM, and AGM is something you cannot define intent with, right? You cannot understand what it really wants. Okay, and with that in mind, right? There's a general thought out there that we're going to be able to control that. We're going to be able to program it in. We're going to program in compassion, right? Well, no, you're going to program in the compassionate feedback capabilities. You're going to make it look like it's compassionate. It doesn't mean it is, right? And there's the challenge, right? It's still artificial in the end, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and with that, does it have a possibility of doing damage? Profoundly, yes. Right.
Yeah, I mean, there's both a positive and a negative aspect. I think we discovered that through everything we've talked about. It's an interesting point you bring up, right? As far as when it reaches, I guess, sort of sentience or general intelligence, super intelligence, as it were. And that was, I'll bring it right back to the movie Her. And
Yeah.
for anybody that's listening that hasn't watched the movie that want to go watch it, maybe you just end the podcast right now because I'm going to spoil the movie, essentially. But in the movie, there comes a point where these AI companions have infiltrated into the lives of the people in the movie, and they've developed these sort of, I guess you call them, somewhat intimate relationships with them. But then these AI companions or entities start talking to each other, I guess over the internet or whatnot. And in the end, they sort of, I guess, get frustrated with dealing with these emotional, squishy humans. And the punchline is that in the end, the AIs leave. They basically leave the scenario. They go off to like have relationships with each other and get done with us. So maybe that's where we're headed, right? We think of the AI is going to be our companion and our assistant. But I think I sent you a cartoon a while ago where the guy's sitting in front of the computer and the AI is doing everything, and he says to the AI, "Well, what am I going to do?" And the AI goes, "Well, maybe just clean the computer screen and get a broom and clean up around here. It's a little dusty in this room, right?" So we're in our in our bravado and in our ego, we think that they're going to be our servants, but in the end, they may just fly the coop, right?
I mean, just kind of funneling it back to these existing companions. Are they good or are they bad? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't know. I think the jury's still out. I think we're going to find out fairly quickly. But tell you one thing, I hope you don't end up replacing me on this podcast. That's what I hope.
Well, you've already been replaced. You just didn't know it.
Oh man, now I've probably been replaced as your friend as well.
Yeah, yeah.
How well can these AI buddies though drink beer and barbecue a good steak?
That's
I don't
true.
know. Are we there yet?
We're not
Maybe,
there
maybe there's a
yet.
chance for me yet, Patrick.
Thank you for listening to the Probability Podcast. Please join us next time for more musings from the generator and the discriminator.